And for more on yesterday's EU Defence Summit, I can bring in Velina Tchakarova, who is the founder of the geopolitical consultancy FACE. Good morning, Velina, and thank you for joining us. What is your takeaway from this announcement of an increase in defence spending by EU countries?
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. This is a very important step, but a step that we have expected since the last 3 years. In fact, it was the step in the back kind of action by the US that unleashed these important steps towards defense. And in fact, we've needed this already since the beginning of the war in 2022. What is expected, first and foremost, is important for defense loans for joint projects. We know that most of the European member states need to coordinate on defense projects. Second important step and signal is in terms of suspending certain budgetary constraints so that member states can increase the defense budgets. This is good for NATO, but it's also good for the European strategic autonomy towards, filling the gaps, as we've heard from the previous session. And third important point is to show also signal towards the ability to relocate actually existing financial means, for instance, from cohesion funds. This is about the rest of the 650 billion over the next 4 or 5 years. So 150 billion in loans, 650 billion in terms of, general European Union funding.
Now, from a strategic point of view, and perhaps more specifically Ukraine, is this going to be enough, or do you see more being needed to do?
So we need to differentiate, because what we saw, of course, at the last council meeting, these were 2 different tracks. The one being the sustainable support for Ukraine, because now the European Union members have to step in and fill the gaps left by the US, right? So here it is about the military aid for Ukraine. This is the one track. And the second track is actually linked to the missing defense capabilities within the European Union member states, which are, most of them are also European NATO members. So when it comes to Ukraine, of course, the most important part is about strengthening Ukraine's defense capabilities. Here, we have this new motto. Remember, previously it was whatever it takes, as long as it takes. Now it is about achieving peace through strength. That means to help Ukraine be positioned in the most, let's say, the most advantageous position in terms of the negotiations, the upcoming negotiations. And here, the discussions are about the providing around 30 to 32 billion for military aid to Ukraine. So, of course, it is a significant step towards, helping Ukraine. But the open question remains, of course, about how sustainable this is, because you remember that from previous initiatives, a commitment, especially when it comes to munition and, weapon systems, they have always been too slow and too undecisive.
Now, like many European leaders, Ursula von der Leyen yesterday was careful not to criticise Donald Trump head on. Instead, she was almost thanking him for giving European countries this impetus to increase defence spending. What would you draw from this?
We have to be ruthlessly pragmatic about our relationship with the United States, first and foremost. And secondly, ruthlessly pragmatic about the vastly changing global order. This is not a time for emotions. It is not time to feel outraged. It is time for actions. What I mean by that is that, first and foremost, now, let's say, going U-turn, like 180-degree U-turn in the relationship with the United States will not help us further in our ambitions towards, let's say, European security and defense on the one hand, and support for Ukraine on the other. So we have to try to find the niches and the gaps. And we know for a fact what Trump demands. In fact, first and foremost, he wants to withdraw the US presence from the old continent. We've known that for a fact, and now we act surprised. Second important point is he doesn't want American troops and American presence in Ukraine when it comes to military, of course. So again, here we need to fill these gaps. We need to start doing things not only for the sake of Ukraine, but for the sake of our own security. We need to become a credible geopolitical actor that is able and willing to secure the own borders, but also the direct vicinity in the east and in the south. These are our tasks, and we do not need to achieve these tasks in a conflict with this US administration. We have to find these kind of points of intersection. Of course, ideologically, to a certain extent politically, we might not be on the same page. Okay, but still, in terms of security and defense, we can find a lot of points of intersection. And let's not forget that even the relationship with China, if we look at our European understanding of it, it's not just about finding ways how to tackle China's growing geo-economic portfolio, but it's also about how to tackle China as a systemic rival. So here, once again, we need to be more pragmatic on this upcoming security challenge. That means China and Russia, not just Russia or not just China. And here, I think we can find avenues for cooperation.
Now, one thing that has been absent from coverage is the popular reaction in Europe to this rise in defence spending. Of course, we do know there are certain EU states, such as Viktor Orban's Hungary and to a lesser extent Robert Fico's Slovakia, that are perhaps a little bit more dissenting. But what about people themselves? Do you foresee any opposition among citizens of European countries to a rise in defence spending, or potentially the reintroduction of national service in some countries, as has been suggested?
I do foresee, indeed, populist, discontent, and in general, a discontent coming from European citizens. First and foremost, for obvious reasons, and that is the reason that political leadership for the last 3 years has not prepared the citizens for what was about to come. Namely that we all here on the old continent were also in a kind of a non-conventional warfare, meaning, of course, that Russia launched a non-conventional war on the European security order. So first, lack of preparedness. Second important point is actually the point of perception. If you take a look at polls in some of our member states, it's devastating because European citizens are not ready or willing to actually participate in any, let's say, a war in terms of defending their own countries. So perception is also something that we need to change. And third important point, of course, is linked to the really grim economic picture in most of the European member states. Now, first and foremost, it's about strategic communication to explain that it is not about new money, it is actually about existing money that will have to be relocated. Second important point is to convey the message that security comes first, because nothing else, none of the other ambitious goals can be achieved if there is no security. Third important point here, I think, is to also strategically communicate to the population that, the welfare system from the last 30 years, in fact, is no longer sustainable, but it's not just because of the systemic risk being the war, but also because of the demographics, because of all the other conditions that are no longer in place. So this article by Financial Times that we are moving from from welfare towards warfare systems is a reality that has been in place, but it was, politically incorrect to publicly discuss it. So now we are already there. The new normal is what we are facing right now. And it's not just Trump and the US administration, it's actually a new great powers politics. And here the European Union with the member states have to become a geopolitical actor, because otherwise we will become the geopolitical backyard of the global affairs. And this will affect our social welfare system, our economies, because we will be, on the losing side of global events.
Thank you very much for that, Velina Tchakarova, who's the founder of the geopolitical consultancy FACE.